Hi friends, my name is Trish Roberts and you're watching The Naked Empire. Unfortunately, tonight Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen, my guests, they only have 30 minutes to talk about this very important documentary and this issue, but hopefully we'll be able to fit in as much information as we can in that time. So firstly, I just wanted to, I'll just pop up Max and Dan on the screen. Hi, Max and Dan, how are you? Max, so Max, if you could just possibly give us a little information about how, the occupation of Palestine happened and what Zionism is, and also the claims that one must be anti-Semitic to criticize the Israeli occupation of Palestinians, and also the claim that Palestinians are the aggressors in this. If you could please explain that, that'd be great.
I can explain it all in just 10 seconds. No, just kidding. Those are the big issues right there. Zionism is essentially Jewish nationalism, or it was initially a secular movement dedicated to establishing an exclusively Jewish state, sort of based off of the kind of Christian nationalist vision that emerged during the Romantic period in Europe at the turn of the 20th century. And so the idea was to find a place somewhere in the world where Jews could live in their own state. At the early, the first Zionist congresses, there was discussion of having the state in Uganda or Argentina. Eventually they settled on historic Palestine, which was under the control of the British because of the historic and symbolic significance that there are many Jewish holy sites there, Jerusalem and also in Hebron. There were several sort of generations of settlers. The first generation were sort of economic settlers who were funded by the Rothschilds, who were not ideologically inclined. Then the second generation came, and they were much harsher towards the indigenous Palestinian population. This was in around 1907, and various waves of Jewish immigrants came in 1948, following World War II and the Jewish genocide in Europe. There was a massive influx of Jews from the displaced persons camps in Europe, and many of them immediately went into the ranks of the Zionist militias. The UN issued the partition plan in 1948. When if you look at the details of actually wasn't going to set up a state with a majority, it would have been a bare majority of 55% Jews, 45% Arabs. This necessitated the ethnic cleansing that actually began before the Israel's declaration of independence on May 15, 1948. So 200 Palestinian villages had already been ethnically cleansed before Israel declared independence and before the war of 1948 began. Israel won that war. It basically was a phony war. We can talk about that another time. But from 1948 to 1966, the Palestinian population inside Israel, who are considered technically citizens, were under military occupation and were subjected to the same similar measures that the Palestinian population was subjected to after the 1967 war that Israel initiated against Egypt and fought against Syria. There's a few other nations. It's occupied the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. And, for the purpose of this conversation, we should just understand why the Gaza Strip was what it was. Particularly, it's become one of the most densely populated places on Earth because its population is comprised of about 72 to 80% refugees. These are the people who were driven from their homes, their villages, their land in 1948. And they're held in the Gaza Strip because they're not Jewish. They simply can't come back to Israel. If you oppose that policy of human warehousing, you could be called an anti-Semite. You're accused of wanting to destroy Israel, and Israel's conflated with Judaism. But really, you're challenging a national project that is based on the ethno-supremacy of one religious group, which is defined according to its ethnicity. just as the Nuremberg laws define Jews. So it's actually, Zionism has a sort of anti-Semitic basis itself, and there's this long-standing history of collaboration between Zionists and anti-Semites that continues to this day. If you are an anti-Semite, then you'll trace the crisis in Israel-Palestine to Judaism rather than colonialism. And the problem here is settler colonialism, not Judaism.
Right. And Max, can you just briefly say why, the Zionist, the Association of American Zionists, excuse me, I'll just pop me on the screen for a moment. The American Zionist Association, Morton Klein, he often uses Hamas as an excuse to bomb Gaza, and also claims that Gazans rent out their homes for rocket launches. Can you just sort of speak to that, please?
Yeah, I mean, Morton Klein is one of the more extreme members of the pro-Israel lobby from the Zionist Organization of America. And, I debated him, and he used all these talking points and held up cartoons of, people in their homes with rockets in their basements. And, Dan and I were in the Gaza Strip during the war in which Israel destroyed 100,000 homes, 100,000 Palestinians. A vast majority of those killed during the war were civilians. This is, according to the UN, according to a consensus of human rights groups who did the death counts. But Israel actually has a doctrine of not just disproportionate force, but deliberately attacking the civilian population. It's called the Ahed doctrine, named after the southern neighborhood of Beirut, which Israel completely leveled in its 2006 war against Hezbollah. It's a majority Shia neighborhood. And the concept of the Ahed doctrine was spelled out by Gadi Eisenkot, who is now the Israeli chief of staff. He directed that assault on Lebanon in 2006. And he said that, basically we can't militarily destroy Hamas or Hezbollah. We can't destroy them as a movement. So what we're going to seek to do is demoralize the civilian population to the point where they turn on Hamas and Hezbollah. And that means we attack the civilian population. He said, everyone in Lebanon is Hassan Nasrallah, the spiritual leader of Hezbollah. And everyone in the Gaza Strip is Khalid Mishal, who is at the time the head of the Hamas Politburo or Central Committee. So basically, Israel stated that its intention to kill and attack civilians, to target them deliberately. It is exempted itself from the Geneva Conventions, which explicitly forbids this, and it is even appointed a professor at Tel Aviv University, Asa Kasher, to write its own code of ethics, which eliminates civilian protections altogether and defines civilians in the Gaza Strip not as such, but as, in Kasher's words, the terrorist's non-dangerous neighbor. In other words, they're just the terrorist neighbor, so it's okay to kill them.
Right. So Dan, let's talk. We'll have to skip a few questions here. So let's talk about the Killing Gaza documentary, which I watched, and really, I was just saying to Dan that I got into like about 15 minutes of it, and I had a knot in my stomach, and I had tears in my eyes. It's so powerful, and so it's really it's and yet it's got hope in it too. So it's sort of like, it really shows, it's a visceral almost. It viscerally communicates the terrible suffering that they are put through. But anyway, if you could just say, you had unlimited access, Dan, to Gaza for 18 months after the Protective Edge assault on Gazans in mid-2014. And can you tell us just what were the physical obstacles for doing that documentary? And you witnessed such destruction and horrible stories that Palestinian families were communicating to you. So how did you deal with that psychologically? And like what and also, do you think that you'll be permanently banned from Gaza after this documentary is released? I mean, I'm just expecting that'll probably happen.
Sure. Yeah, I realize that's a possibility. I wouldn't be banned from Gaza necessarily by Hamas or anything, by the authorities there, but by Israel, and more likely I would just be banned by Israel entirely, if anything. But I don't think the system is necessarily that sophisticated. So we'll just have to see. But in terms of making the documentary, we went into the Gaza Strip towards the last 2 weeks or so of the war during a 5-day ceasefire. Max and I got our press cards and just went in as soon as we could, and we went to Shujaiya, which is one of the neighborhoods that was basically large swaths of it were wiped out by artillery. And when we got there at the beginning of the ceasefire, people were kind of coming out of the schools, the UNRWA schools that were serving as shelters for displaced people who had fled the bombing, and they were coming back to their houses and finding ruins and even digging bodies out of the rubble. And we documented these scenes, and we didn't even actually have, we just kind of had the idea to make a documentary on the spot. We were just getting, recording for transcriptions, for journalism, for written articles, but we were seeing such powerful scenes that we felt like, the best way to communicate them would be through film. And I had my camera and a little microphone, and we just started recording, and I continued to go back. I stayed until the end of the war. We stayed, and then I continued to go back until for about a 2-year period. And I spent 6.5 months in Gaza. Throughout the seasons, throughout winter, throughout summer, kind of documenting people surviving through everyday crises, where things that you and I take for granted. We're in Washington, D.C. in terms of clean water, electricity, just simple basic facts of life that just do not exist in Gaza. And that's on top of going through just the most devastating experiences, and where you have no sense of security. You could just be killed at any point. And so it just becomes like every day is kind of like a game of survival. That's how our friends would describe it to us. And so that really never stops. Even after the bombs stop dropping, there's still no sense of security. You can just die at any point. It's almost as if there's an invisible person with a gun to your head at any point. That's life. And they could kill you at any point, and that's life for every single person in Gaza. And so I filmed, people living under siege and how that affects their daily lives. Where your child can burn to death or freeze to death, because of lack of electricity, or all these just horrible situations that people are somehow surviving through. And then we also documented how Palestinians resist, whether that is through armed resistance, as one you'll see in the film. I was able to go and film with one of the armed resistance groups, and most of these guys were young guys who had lost family members, siblings, who had seen horrors, and just realized that's kind of the only option they had left. That if they're all, I would say about Gaza, people they have a unique, intimate relationship with death. Because everyone knows people who has died, whether it's family members or people around them. And so it's a different relationship than I think Westerners understand in general. Basically, we also filmed how people resist nonviolently, whether it's through dance. People kind of separate themselves from politics in an incredibly dire situation, and try to have something where they find a little bit of happiness in their life, or through paint, as we document through painting, where one young girl, Malak Matar, who's now in Istanbul, she finally, escaped the siege. She was this brilliant young painter who had started to hone her craft during the bombardment because she was so terrified and sleeping in her room all the time. And so she began painting and found this incredible talent. So, we really try to paint a full portrait of life in Gaza as best we could, with rather limited resources and, no major visions starting out, just to really document life as long as we could.
Yeah, I think you did a really fantastic job of that, and just the interviews, like with Sabda Shamali in Shujaiya. That when she said, she said to her son, "Come into this room because if we die, we want to die all together, and so that people won't have to be looking for us in the rubble." The sort of that kind of thing, mothers and children having to make those kind of decisions. And then these executions, like one man coming home in that one of those towns, one man coming home and finding that 6 people had been executed in his home, and with a knife. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's sort of like a real hell on earth, and it's just an ongoing thing. Can you talk about, like Max? Can you talk about the bulldozing of homes? Like Dan, you had like an excerpt where Nasser Shamali, his home was being bulldozed. Can you talk a little bit about that, or either one?
Sure. I mean, the bulldozer has long been Israel's kind of weapon of choice, because it's a way to take out a village, and it's been used to kill people as well. But part of it's one of its weapons in war is it's a weaponized bulldozer, is the D9 Caterpillar bulldozer. And so that was used extensively in Gaza, as it is, throughout all of historic Palestine, whether that's in the Nakab Desert, where Bedouin communities are constantly being destroyed, and then as well as in the West Bank. But in Gaza, it was basically, Nasser Shamali was, he stayed in his house when the Israelis invaded, thinking he could just wait it out. And they started to just bulldoze his home. So, basically bulldozing anything, as perhaps searching for tunnels or some kind of operation, but essentially anything civilian is considered collateral damage and just to be discarded, whether that's human life or homes or anything. And so, this is one of the major weapons of war for Israel. Actually, just outside of the city of Beersheba, former Haba, there is to be a memorial to a bulldozer, to a D9 bulldozer. Yeah. It's actually up like the one that died or something. It's like up on end, and it's a massive memorial, and it's truly bizarre. But it's as if Israel thinks it's it's one of its soldiers that went down in battle bravely. I don't exactly know how, but so
yeah, we told this story of Nasser Shamali at great length, and we included animation to help illustrate. Dan interviewed him, tracked him down, and found him in his home months after we had heard about his incredible story. And so my friend Nuri Zander, who's a really talented animator, illustrated his story. And basically, during the first wave of the Israeli assault on Shujaiya, which is this border area between Gaza, at the real precipice at the border of Gaza and Israel, people were trapped and couldn't escape, and they met Israeli infantry. They were nervous. They were told to shoot anything that moved, and they began doing field executions. Nasser Shamali was an older man who sold clothes. He had like a linen business or a textile business, and he was shot by an officer. He fell into some clothes that he owned. He was shot in his arm, and the officer shot around him but missed him miraculously and thought he was dead. Shamali played dead, lied there, waited till the Israelis left, and then bandaged himself up in his own house. Then all of a sudden he's sitting in his house trying to wait out the Israeli assault, and a bulldozer comes and starts taking down his house while he's inside it. So he jumps out of his house, starts running down the street, while his neighborhood is honeycombed with Israeli soldiers, and then a drone starts following him. The drone thinks that he's a fighter, and he has to, this is a man in his 60s, find his way out of Shujaiya, he finds a taxi cab miraculously. The cab gets him into Gaza City, and his whole family's there, and they think he's dead. So this is one of the few kind of happy stories in the documentary. But yeah, the bulldozer is sort of an ever-present facet of the Israeli occupation, whether it's during high-intensity, full-scale war, or just knocking down homes in East Jerusalem that they consider "quote-unquote" illegal construction. But this is really, an instrument of ethnic cleansing and demographic management.
Yeah, I heard the way the government actually sorry, I've got a bit of an echo there. The way the government actually, or the way the settlers actually let people know that they are going to demolish their home is they just put like a note under a rock. And if you miss out on that note, that's just too bad. And then they come a week later and just knock your home down with a bulldozer. I mean, it's outrageous.
Or a half hour later.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. I just wanted to talk about Nasser Shamali. Was it his son Salim Shamali who was looking for his relatives in the rubble, and then
It was not it's not his son, but it's from the same like larger family.
That's actually how we managed to. That's how we managed to locate Salim Shamali's family. Was through the was it the cousins of Nasser Shamali? Basically, during our interview about Nasser Shamali, our initial interview, the young man we interviewed his son. His son said, "Do you want to meet Salim?" So he said, "Yeah," and he gave us his address, and so we met to meet Salim Shamali's family. Salim Shamali is, one of the most high-profile atrocities of Operation Protective Edge in 2014. He was killed execution style on video by an Israeli sniper while looking in rubble for his cousin who had been badly wounded and needed to be medevaced or evacuated.
Yeah, and there's that's a regular thing. Executions like that, like assassinations like that. I remember just a few weeks ago, Ibrahim Abu Taraya. That's probably a terrible pronunciation of that man's name, but he was a wheelchair-bound Palestinian activist, and he was shot in the head while he was in his wheelchair with no. He had no, guns with him or anything, and he had no legs. And the way he supported 11 people was to wash cars. I mean, it just sort of, and that sort of, those kind of sniper shootings are quite common.
Well, Dan filmed.
I used to film. I filmed a few of these demonstrations, and a couple of them are in the film. And so he
was killed. First of all, he was killed at a demonstration in the buffer zone in the Gaza Strip. Every Friday there are demonstrations where people in Gaza, mostly young men, try to go to the buffer because Israel forbids them from this strip of land that's 300 meters from the wall and electrified fence that's on the Gaza Strip border. So that's where he was shot, and Dan filmed several of those demonstrations. They're extremely violent from the Israeli side, particularly.
Yeah, it's essentially, anywhere from a few dozen to a few hundred young men just trying to simply cross the border, and they'll chant, "We're going to Jerusalem," and they really just want to have their freedom of movement and, go back to the villages their forefathers, their grandfathers and grandmothers were expelled from. And for that, they are mowed down. And so sometimes you'll see a shoot to cripple policy from the Israeli soldiers where they'll shoot in the legs, particularly the kneecaps. And sometimes they get orders for shoot to kill, where they'll shoot in the chest, abdomen, or head. So I used to see Ibrahim Abu Thuraya at the demonstrations. I remember seeing him. And he's an extremely brave figure. I mean, there's an account of a friend of his with him right moments before he died. His friend was pushing him out, and he wanted to go further and further, and he jumped out of his wheelchair and kept kind of going towards the border. And then the Israelis just shot and killed him. And, he's, just an iconic figure that, the world should know. Absolutely. And he represents so many more.
Yes, really. I just, what was a very powerful moment was the cutaways between seeing the devastation during that 2-week siege, and then cutting away to these sort of racist demonstrations by, young Israeli people, sort of calling out, Gaza is a graveyard. There is no school tomorrow. There are no children in Gaza, and jumping up and down. How common are those demonstrations? And also, how does one, this often makes me wonder, like, because the two-state solution is dead, And so, and the BDS campaign is sort of taking hold. But I'm just wondering, just say, for sake of argument, you know, if something was worked out in this, how on earth are, you know, with all the extreme sort of almost like calling for genocide, it is, well, it's not almost, they actually literally call for genocide of Palestinians. How is this going to sort of like, you know, resolve that sort of, you know, living this sort of extreme racism that's there and stuff? You know what I mean?
Well,
how is it all going to?
It's hard to say what would happen with those people, what they would do in any kind of, you know, real settlement in the country. But basically, as Israel has become more and more violent and right wing over the years, and the discourse has kind of degraded through war after war, in which actually Israel loses. Israel hasn't won a war since 1967, and so losing war for such a boastful, kind of prideful country that and an occupier really kind of degrades their rhetoric. And so Israel has become more and more right wing and racist. And in 2014, during periods of war, but particularly during 2014, it came out like it had really never been seen before, where, you know, even liberal Zionist peace demonstrations that just simply wanted an end to the bombing and criticized it were attacked by organized mobs connected to the government, to Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. So these are organized mobs going out on the street to basically beat, you know, anyone they deem leftist. And they would basically be bussed in, and they had organization with popular rappers even. And so that's, you know, a little bit of what we showed. We wanted to kind of contrast the psychological violence in Israel and the incitement, the mass incitement campaigns, and reality for Palestinians in Gaza. That you know, what these hooligans are calling for, in terms of killing children in Gaza, and they think that they're being kind of edgy, is really happening. It's almost as if it's really, you know, part of policy. So, you know, we thought it was important to kind of connect those realities and see them as kind of a bigger picture instead of isolated.
Yeah, just in closing.
Yes.
Because we were running up against the clock and we got to go. But just in closing, I mean, we really didn't. Besides those sort of racist demonstrations at the Western Wall in Jerusalem that Dan filmed, where, you know, youth were basically cheering for the death of the mass death in Gaza, and, you know, there was footage of soccer hooligans in Tel Aviv chanting, "There's no school in Gaza tomorrow. Gaza's a graveyard." You know, Israelis don't really appear in our in our film Killing Gaza. This film is about people in Gaza who have been erased by Israeli society, in the Israeli consciousness as people. We don't appear in the film. I mean, I inserted my voice just to help guide viewers through the different scenes, so they understand what's going on. But, you know, you're not going to see the Vice style white man safari in a brown environment type of documentary here. It's the people who really narrate and guide you through and we're just trying to bring them into focus, because what Israel has enacted, a genocidal project. It's a project of cultural genocide, of politicide, to essentially eliminate Palestinians in Israeli life through various means. And, you know, well, I'm not saying that there's an industrial level genocide going on where there's mass killing. We're talking about something else, just the elimination of a people through walls, through the legal system, through various methods of occupation. And so this film really for us is sort of the way that we shot it, the aesthetic of it, is sort of what we see as a form of creative resistance against one of the most toxic aspects of Zionism. And, you know, we depict what happened in the war when Israelis decided that, you know, they hadn't done enough killing towards the end. Netanyahu had to satiate their need for more bloodshed and more destruction. And so what happened at the end of the war was that the Israeli military brought down three of the major towers, residential and office towers in Gaza City, just for no reason at all, except to make a point that the middle class, educated people and the media in Gaza City could be attacked too. And so, this was a major aspect of the documentary. It's a film that we're going to try to get the widest exposure possible for, and right now we're just exploring the right means to do that. So we're really happy to come on here and kind of give people a preview or an idea of what this documentary is about. But I can assure everyone watching right now that you will at some point see it. We're going to make it as accessible as possible, and it's killing Gaza.
I've grown to, the Palestinians as a whole are just the most incredibly strong and courageous. What they go through every single day, and yet there's joy in that film and hope, and the children are incredible. It's really an amazing film. You brought through so many different aspects, sort of like it really is sort of visceral. It really kind of reaches across. So I'd implore everybody to go see this, and and find. I'll leave some links to at some point. I don't know. We're not exactly sure how you're going to, or how they're going to see it. But anyway, we'll find a way of letting people know. And so thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. I wish I could have asked you some more questions, but never mind. And finally, what do you think? What can you say about the BDS campaign, and just in relation to addressing this situation for Palestinians?
Well, I just think BDS is something everyone can do, and it's an educational campaign as well as an economic campaign. It's still at its, just as an observer, it appears to just be getting started, because beyond the boycott and divestment, there are sanctions. And, I think we're witnessing a change in the political environment where sanctions will someday be on the table. Hopefully not, economic sanctions that punish average Israelis, but military sanctions. And I think Israel is extremely vulnerable to that kind of sanctioning. But right now we're witnessing how vulnerable Israel is to the kind of psychological damage to its international image when a pop star like Lorde refuses to perform. So BDS has already, proven its effectiveness. Israel's declared it a threat on the same level as, the armed factions in Gaza or Hezbollah in Lebanon. And it is a nonviolent campaign. It's something that Palestinians have asked people to do. And, if you're not supportive of this call, I don't think you can really claim to be supportive of Palestinian human rights.
Well, thank you so much. I won't hold you up any longer. Thanks so much, Dan. Thanks so much, Max, for making this great documentary. It really is. I hope maybe one day we might be able to get you on again to follow up on some of that. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Well, we'll wind up now. So, okay. Bye for now. Thanks everybody for listening. Okay. Bye for now.